Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar called Managing Rabbits as a Pest in Victoria. My name is Anna Pimenta, and some of you might know me already, but I'm the Landcare Development Coordinator with Landcare Victoria. I want to start by acknowledging the important work that all of you do as volunteers or professionally, contributing every day to running environmental groups, being that around governance, planting trees, and controlling weeds and pests, including rabbits. Rabbits are one of the Victoria's most widespread and destructive pest animals. They cause significant damage to native vegetation, crops, and soils, and can quickly turn years of hard work destroy years of hard work in land restoration. And I'm sure most of you understand this. In today's session, we will bring together science and on-ground examples to explore practical strategies and resources to help you and your groups and community manage rabbits more effectively and sustainably. Please note that the advice provided by Landcare Victoria and our guest speakers tonight is intended as general guidance only, and we recommend seeking tailored professional advice for any complex or very specific questions that we might not be able to answer. But before we start, on behalf of Landcare Victoria and our speakers tonight, we'd like to pay our respects to the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we are meeting today. Landcare Victoria recognises the ongoing role of traditional owners in caring for land, water, sky and wildlife, and acknowledges the deep connections that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have to the country. I would like to personally acknowledge the Kunai peoples, the land I am working on today here in Gippsland, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And I also extend this acknowledgement to the traditional owners of all the lands that everyone joining us today is connecting from, and offer a special acknowledgement to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples with us tonight. Just some quick housekeeping before we get stuck into it. First, please don't feel like you need to write everything down, as a recording of this session will be shared with all of you and also available in our website. We'll also share some of the presentations and the resources with you. Please also note that all microphones have been muted, and we will be stopping briefly after each session to answer some questions, and again at the end if the time allows. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen at any time to pose a question. We do have a lot to cover tonight, so if you have a question that goes unanswered or something you'd like to follow up on, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us after this webinar. And I'd also like to acknowledge the brilliant questions that some of you have submitted prior to this webinar, and hopefully we can cover some of these tonight. And as I mentioned, I am Anna Pimenta, and I am here on behalf of Landcare Victoria. I'm also joined by Sarah Vella, our Communications Officer. She'll be assisting us with managing some of your questions and helping running this session. So, we're pleased to introduce you our main speaker for tonight, Heidi Kleinert. She's the National Rabbit Coordinator at the Centre for Invasive Species Solution, and Heidi will be giving you an overview on the issue of rabbits in Victoria and nationally. And we're also lucky to have a wide range of speakers presenting today. We have Jason Wishart is the Biosecurity Manager for AgVic, and will be sharing with you what chemicals and poisons are available to control rabbits, how to use them, and some of the regulations and legislation and impacts when dealing with these different chemicals and poisons. We have Jack Harris. He is an Invasive Species Officer at Basque Coast Landcare Network, and he'll be showcasing in practical terms how they handle rabbit control down in the Basque Coast. And finally, we have Ina Smith, a Senior Research Scientist at the CSIRO, and we'll be demonstrating how to optimize biological control tools and the difference between biological controls and biocides. And before I hand over to Heidi, I would also like to acknowledge the funding provided by the Victorian Government through the Partnerships Against Pests program that has made the delivery of this session and other relevant webinars possible. And with that, I'll hand over to Heidi. Thanks, Heidi.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm joining everyone today from Judge Wurrung country here in Bendigo, and I just wanted to thank Landcare Victoria for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. As Anna mentioned, I'm the National Feral Rabbit Management Coordinator, and I work for the Centre for Invasive Species Solutions, which, for those who might not be familiar with the centre, we're Australia's only independent, not-for-profit organisation that's dedicated to research, development, and extension on invasive species. So the National Coordinator Program wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship, which are on the screen right now. So we've got federal sponsors from DAF and DQ, New South Wales DPIRD, and Darling Downs Moreton Rabbit Board and Rabbit Free Australia. So thanks for their support. So let's talk about rabbits. Well, rabbits impact everyone, everywhere, every day, and they're located in all states and territories in Australia, including several offshore islands. And I wanted to take the time to talk about rabbits, their impacts, and why they are Australia's biggest threat to our landscapes. And I'm also going to talk about why rabbits are so challenging to manage and discuss how my role is helping reshape and support the future of our rabbit programs. Next slide, please. So rabbits are a national disaster for our flora and fauna. They are identified as a threatening process under the EPBC Act, and they are a key threat to over 322 species at risk. So this is more than twice the number of species impacted by cats and foxes. And each year, species are added to this threatened species list. And simply put, if we do nothing about rabbits, this will continue. Next slide, please. They cause long-term damage and they change landscapes permanently. And this is in particularly in locations such as sandhills, lunettes, and sand dunes. Next slide. And they efficiently strip the vegetation and prevent natural regeneration of our native plants. And in arid and semi-arid locations, rabbits are quite easily able to eliminate every seedling of species, such as she oak species. Next slide. They damage important places to us, such as our cemeteries, our parks and gardens. And they also can disturb and damage cultural heritage sites that are really important to our First Nations people. For the agricultural industry, rabbits cost on average $200 million in production losses, and this is almost 10 times greater than the losses caused by foxes and mice. And without control, it's estimated that the rabbits would exceed over $2 billion a year in damages. They reduce wool quality through exposure of bare ground. They increase our fox populations, and our livestock can experience leg injuries due to burrows. And they also help spread weeds. But how did they get here? Well, we need to thank a gentleman named Thomas Austin for that, who kindly introduced 24 wild rabbits at Barwon Park near Geelong for a shooting expedition. And this number quickly grew from 24 to over 14,000 by 1866. Next slide, please. At the rate of spread of rabbits in Australia, it's determined that it was the fastest of any colonising mammal anywhere in the world. And although we've had bounties and markets for rabbit meat and fur, the combined rabbit numbers made trapping very successful and profitable industry. However, these industries didn't curb the rabbit populations. And it wasn't until we had the introduction of Mixo in the 1950s that we really saw populations fall across Australia. And this proves that science is a real key to rabbit management in Australia. So why are they so successful? Well, to me, they're a triple threat across biology, environment, and social. So 166 years later, we are still dealing with them. Their high breeding capability means that there's no quick fix or silver bullet. Rabbits have developed resistances to the viruses that we've released, and warren systems are not being removed or destroyed, which aids the reproduction of rabbits. But some of our biggest factors lie around social issues. So we've lost the awareness of how to manage rabbits. We don't plan and work together when we're doing our rabbit programs. And our community attitudes are shifting towards pest management in Australia. Some of the system challenges that I've also observed since being in the role of the coordinator is that rabbit management is listed as a shared responsibility, but not everyone is doing the heavy lifting. And biosecurity and biodiversity are managed separately and often clash in policies and legislations. People still believe that government will do the job for them or the new virus will do the job. And programs that are being delivered are having a neutral benefit and proving that they're wasting time and money because they're not done efficiently or effectively. Next slide. So if we change nothing, nothing will change. And if we want better results, we need to make rabbit control programs more effective. Next slide, please. We need to have a plan. We need to work together. We need to use all the tools available and monitor and follow up our programs and tell others that we're doing our bit to manage rabbits. Next slide. There's been a lot of research over the years in rabbit management, and in fact, we've known who, what, when, where, and how to control rabbits for a very long time. And the key idea is instead of relying on one control method like baiting, you integrate and use a strategic mix of techniques. And research undertaken by Williams and Moore recorded that the most cost-effective way was to use a combination of methods, including bait, rip, and fumigate. And Jason will go into more detail in the next presentation of how to control rabbits. Next slide. We need to use integrated pest management, and this uses control methods in a rapid succession. The first control method in the blue line here on the graph aims to reduce rabbit populations by 95%. And then the second control methods mop up the remaining rabbit populations left in your environment. And although a high effort and cost at the initial stage of control method one, this results a huge knockdown and the maintenance is sustained and it's sustained at a very low cost. Next slide. So in pest management, everyone needs to work together. This is fundamentally key to a successful rabbit program as rabbits don't recognise boundaries or fences, and we need to care and commit and contribute to rabbit programs in our local and regional areas. So everyone truly has a role to play in our environment. So as a collective, we're sitting here today discussing the rabbit issue with a choice of three possible futures. The first one to me is do nothing and our rabbit population simply worsen. The second one, please click again, is do something. And our situation may stay the same and it requires continual effort with a neutral benefit. And our third future is do something useful. So use best practice, work with others, and do something that's really impactful that will make a difference to our landscapes. Next slide, please. So a little bit about my role. This is where the main purpose of my role is to help people better manage rabbits and reduce their negative impacts. So we need to do this to protect our landscapes, our agriculture, and our cultural heritage and our well-being. And this program, as I mentioned, I work very closely with a steering committee that has supported this program and helped me design a really great working work plan. Next slide. And this covers 5 priority areas to help realise the vision. And this includes raising awareness of the rabbit issue, so collecting and sharing information on the impact of rabbits like today and what we can all do about it. It's also about increasing capacity, helping people get information easily and it's clear and simple to understand, and increasing the adoption of the best practice. And I'm also trying to improve our national standards. So I'm coordinating a review of our operating procedures and codes of practice so we ensure that everything we do on rabbits is humanely and effective. And I'm also working to connect researchers and practitioners. So the science is important, but the on-ground people need to know what that's all about as well. The last 2 goals are about building partnerships, so connecting with people with expertise that are working on a rabbit problem so they have the best practice knowledge, and encouraging collaboration and on-ground action for those that are working on programs that should work with others. And the last goal is all about protecting important assets. So those working to protect things like Ramsar wetlands or priority sites in our landscapes are incorporating rabbit management in their site management plans. And the last one also is about engaging stakeholders and advocating for a national rabbit survey. If we don't know how big the rabbit problem is and where the rabbits are, how can we solve this problem? Next slide, please. Some of the work I've been doing also has been in partnership to support CSIRO and other research organisations to continue the research in biological control. And our researchers are doing such a fantastic job. They're looking at how to optimise viruses, how we can get better use from the current viruses we've got. They're looking to discover new viruses and pathogens. They're looking to select better strains of our existing viruses. and understand what biological control has on rabbits and also off-target species. And lastly, they're doing some very innovative research on developing genetic biocontrol for rabbits. But I should point out that it takes 10 years to develop, approve, and release a new virus. And if we continue this work and continue the investment, we'll still won't have another virus for until 2036, which means we need everyone here today to do their bit on rabbit management. Next slide, please. So, being a coordinator, I get to support a lot of work through engagement, extension, and field days, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work on these Partnership Against Pest programs in Victoria. Next slide. And I get to help people access information. So you can go and get information from PestSmart and RabbitScan, Agriculture Victoria, Victorian Rabbit Action Network, Landcare CMAs, and there's some great tools out there, and I encourage you all to go and have a look at them. We share resources all the time, and I'd encourage you to, if you don't know about rabbit management after this, then go and do further homework and look up at these sites. I've also developed a dedicated feral rabbit newsletter that talks about what you can do different seasons on rabbit management, and it shares stories about rabbit action and land care groups doing their bit on rabbit management. Next slide. So before I end my presentation, I guess I just wanted to emphasize that where there's a will, there's a way with rabbit management. And I really encourage everyone here to be informed. I guess disinformation and misinformation is a major concern when it comes to pest management. And with cost of living pressures, no one wants to waste their time and management on a failed rabbit program. So get your rabbit program off to a great start by expanding your skills like you are today and get an understanding of the steps involved in a great rabbit program. There's so many practical solutions out there on these websites that I mentioned just previously, and you'll be able to find some great support from your land care groups, government staff who also offer free advice. The second thing is I encourage you to be committed. Pest management requires long-term commitment, and you won't solve your rabbit problem overnight. Commit the time and commit the resources every year. And my third and final takeaway is to work together. Commit to working with your neighbours in a coordinated program. It's really successful, really essential to be successful in your rabbit program. And that's my last slide, is the next one. So I really encourage you to think about this line that pest free, this is the way that Australia's nature's intended. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Heidi. That was great. We do have some time for questions if anyone has something in particular now that you want to ask Heidi. Otherwise, we can keep going with Jason. There will be other opportunities to post some questions. We do, if you can put in your questions in the chat function, that would be great. Jackie, I can see you've got your hand raised. Are you able to put a question in the chat, please?
It's there, Anna.
Yep, I can
Oh,
answer
sorry.
those ones in the chat if you like.
Thanks, Heidi.
No.
All right. Any other questions? Sorry, Sarah, can you check the questions
Yep,
for
there's a
me?
couple in there, and Heidi's going to follow them
Okay.
for us.
Yep. So we're probably okay to go ahead because some of what Heidi has been talking about is going to be explored a bit further with our next speakers. So there will be time after Jack's presentation. So we're going to try to join Jason's presentations with Jack because some of the things that Jason will talk about in regards to control techniques will be explored with Jack as well. So it might be a good thing to just answer some of those questions later live. So if you're ready, Jason, do you want to start presenting?
Yes, no worries. I don't have the uh, presentation up on my screen at the moment. Oh, there we are. Perfect. Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Heidi, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm dialing in from Wathaurong country here out of Geelong. Today, so Heidi mentioned the strategic approach to rabbit management, and I will talk a little bit about that at the beginning of this presentation, but after that, I'll largely focus on the use of pesticides in rabbit management and how to apply those most effectively and safely, and then wrap it up with a bit more information about how you can work together and those types of things. So yeah, we might as well keep moving on through. So this little graphic here basically displays the information that Heidi touched on there with that research from Williams and Moore. And basically what you need to do with rabbit management is be really strategic about it. Defining the problem is the first thing. So you've got to really understand how big the issue is, who your key stakeholders are, all those types of things, the land that you're working on, and then you can begin to develop a plan. And the plan should be developed in consultation with your key stakeholders. The first step usually in rabbit management is to reduce the numbers, and that can be achieved largely through baiting, but also through the use of RHDV K5, which Ina will talk about a little bit later on. But yeah, so you want to reduce the numbers as much as you possibly can at the beginning of your program, and then you want to remove the harbour because, as Heidi mentioned, the warren is where the rabbits breed, and without removing that, they'll just breed up again. So if you reduce them with baiting alone, they'll just breed up and use those warrens. So you do need to get rid of the warrens with ripping, and you do also need to try and get rid of surface harbour. There's a range of different things that rabbits will harbour under, but woody weeds is typically one of them, and junk piles and under sheds and that type of thing. So it can get tricky, the harbour removal stuff in certain situations, but it is important. The next bit is to follow up after your harbour removal with fumigation. So you want to get out there fairly soon after to look for reopenings in those warrens and treat those again. And that's just a continuous cycle basically to continually work, because rabbits are widespread established species in Victoria. Yeah, it's going to take effort and really they'll be eradicated. So moving on to the next phase is about the baiting. There seems to be a bit of, there's something covering my screen there. Sorry, Anna, I can't actually see. Yeah, that's it. Perfect. So baiting. This is a bit of a summary slide on baiting, and then I'll go into the chemicals a bit more specifically, and then the application. So in Victoria, there are two bait substrates used for rabbits, and that is carrots, which are considered perishable baits, and oak baits as well, which are considered shelf stable. They both have their pros and cons. Rabbits do like both. Palatability seems to be equivalent with each, but there are probably a few things with oats that are a little bit more handy, I guess, in that your carrots can go off or perish a little sooner than the oats do. So if your program's delayed for whatever reason, then the carrot baits do degrade a bit. But yeah, the oats are ready to go. The two poisons registered for use on rabbits in Victoria are 1080 and pindone. I'll go into those in a little more detail in our following slides. So to get the best out of your baiting program, you really want to undertake baiting when alternate feed is scarce, and that's normally towards the end of summer, start of autumn. Reason for that is they're more likely to consume baits at that time. Breeding's normally paused as well, so the younger rabbits are more likely to come out of the warren and venture out and find bait. The social hierarchies as well have begun to break down a little bit when it's not the breeding season, so more dominant animals are less likely to chase other animals off your bait trails and those types of things. The other thing that's really important is free feeding. There's a lot of reasons why free feeding is important. One of the main ones is that you familiarize the animal or the rabbit with the bait material, because they are neophobic, a bit wary of new things. So it's really important to do that. It also helps you to identify where they're actively feeding, gives you an opportunity to have a look for non-target species as well that could be at risk in the area, and then you can modify or use something different to avoid harming them. And it can help to determine your bait rate and that type of thing too. So baiting in general is good for those initial population knockdowns, like we said before. It's cost effective as well over large areas for those population knockdowns. Some of the negatives associated with baiting is that it may pose a risk to non-target species, and that populations quickly recover after baiting. Like we mentioned before, if you don't get rid of that harbour and the warrens, it's left there for rabbits to repopulate. And I think there was a figure on one of Heidi's slides there before that two rabbits can end up 156 or so rabbits within a 12 months period. So they can recover very quickly. Next slide. So I'll touch on 1080 first, and then we'll move on to pindone. So 1080 is considered an acute toxin. It takes one dose for a rabbit to die from 1080 poisoning. It's a Schedule 7 restricted poison, so that means that to use 1080, we need to have your A cup, and it needs to be a 1080 endorsed A cup. 1080 occurs naturally, or the compound fluoroacetate occurs naturally in some Australian plants. And it's been synthesized into a toxin. But because of that, some of our native species have developed a little bit of a resistance to 1080. So they are a little bit less sensitive to some of the introduced species like rabbits and foxes. 1080 was identified as a potential rodenticide back in the 1940s, around the time of the war, when rodents were getting into food stocks and all that. There was a real elevated effort to look for rodenticides at that time, and it was first used in Australia in the 1950s for rabbit management. Since then, it's also been used for other animals like foxes and feral pigs. It basically works by blocking the cell's ability to transport energy around the body. So those energy dependent or highly energy dependent organs like the brain and the heart and those types of things begin to shut down through lack of energy. Death occurs in rabbits in about 3 to 4 hours. There's no antidote for 1080 poisoning. So if an animal a non-target animal accidentally receives a lethal dose, there's not a great deal that can be done, particularly if it's only noticed sort of later on. If it's noticed early and taken to a vet, there can be some things done, but there is no antidote. It's also highly soluble in water, so it doesn't last in the environment all that long. There are withholding periods and those sorts of things, but it does break down, and it breaks down in the rabbit carcasses, but also the bait left out in the field breaks down with water and also in the soil with microbes and those sorts of things. Next slide. So pindone is different to 1080. It's a first generation anticoagulant, and it's an S6 toxin. You don't need an A cup to use pindone, but it is recommended because you learn a lot of good stuff when you're doing your A cup on chemical handling and transportation and storage and those sorts of things. You do need to follow the label, of course. It was identified as a potential rodenticide as well in about the 1940s, but it wasn't used in Australia for rabbits until the 1980s. We only use pindone for rabbits in Australia, that we don't use them for any other species. It works by blocking vitamin K production in the liver, and basically what that does is it prevents the blood from clotting. So what happens generally over time, the animals will have internal injuries, and that will cause bleeding, and that bleeding won't stop, and they die from that internal hemorrhaging. Can take several days for that to happen. It's a cumulative toxin as well, so it's not that one dose like an acute toxin. It takes several doses, and normally that's 3 doses spaced over, so you'll have one toxic night, have a rest for a day, another toxic night, have a rest for a day, and another toxic night. That's what works best for rabbits. So it's really important to remember the difference there, whether you choose 1080 or pindone, and how they're used. Because if you get one dose of pindone, you're going to be unsuccessful in reducing your rabbit numbers. The delayed onset of symptoms is important though, because it can reduce the chances of bait shyness. The rabbits have already eaten enough bait before they realize what's going on, basically, with pindone because of the delayed onset. So they don't get bait shy like they can with 1080 if they receive a sublethal dose. And the other important thing is there is an antidote for pindone poisoning, and that's a vitamin K injection. And it's a pretty lengthy process, but it is possible to save domestic dogs or what have you with that accidentally receive pindone. So the strategy for effective baiting, of course, conduct your risk assessment at the beginning. Again, just to reiterate, baiting when alternate feed is scarce, because they're more likely to take the bait at that time. As we mentioned, they're more likely to come across your trails. Working with neighbours is essential because working by yourself, they'll quickly reinvade from other areas. So the bigger the area that you target, the slower it is for them to reinvade. Selecting appropriate toxins, so whether it's 1080 or pindone, depending on your situation. Pre-feeding as well is critical for rabbit management for a whole range of things, like I said earlier. And yeah, the other thing that it does do as well is it helps you to determine that bait rate. And that's important because if you put too much poison out, there'll be a lot of poison left over at the end of the program, and you have to dispose of that. So pre-feeding helps you to determine where they're feeding, and it can reduce the amount of toxin that actually goes out, which is really good for trying to reduce risks in non-target species. Putting the bait out later in the afternoon is also good. It's less time out in the landscape, less chance for non-targets, and of course, disposing of uneaten baits and carcasses at the end of the day. And the directions for use of 1080 and PAP products in Victoria contain all that type of information on risk assessments, distances, how to dispose of baits and that type of thing. So really important to read that document. The next one, so fumigation, just quickly. So fumigation is another method used to manage rabbits. It's basically destruction of rabbits in the warren system. The toxin that we use in Victoria is aluminium phosphide, and that comes in tablet form basically. And when it's exposed to the moisture, it reacts, and phosphine gas disperses throughout the warren. So it's best achieved, or the best results with fumigation are achieved generally when you use, well, firstly when you map all your warrens, and then you need to use some sort of device. The smoker device here, you can see in the image, helps to determine where all those entrances are. Some of them are very hard to find, so that smoker distributes throughout the warren and pops out of the little holes all around the place, and you can mark them and make sure that each one is treated. Positives, it's good for those hard to reach burrows, sometimes where you can't rip for whatever reason. Fumigation can be a good option. The other thing is, of course, it's a great follow-up to ripping. It is labor intensive. Non-targets may be at risk if you don't do your proper risk assessments of the burrow. So looking at the entrance for native species footprints and evidence of rabbits is really important. So you don't want to fumigate warrens if non-targets are actually using them instead of the rabbit. And the humaneness is questionable for fumigation in some situations. So next slide. So aluminium phosphide, as I mentioned, is the toxin that's used. It's purchased in pellet form, produces a phosphine gas when it's exposed to the moisture. It's a colorless garlic odor type gas, and that disperses naturally or by itself, really dissipates throughout the warren system. Spreads quickly because it's heavier than air, so it does travel throughout the warren. Its inhalation is how the rabbits are intoxicated with that, and it generally affects the central nervous system and respiratory function. Time until death depends on how much exposure they have, but it's around about that 3 or 4 hours. It's not target specific, so if there are non-target species in the warren, they could be impacted by that. So really important to look and make sure that it is rabbits that are using it. It does degrade rapidly in the environment, and there's no secondary poisoning risk if something happens to eat a poisoned carcass. I think I've got a couple more slides to go. So strategy for effective fumigation, again with conducting the risk assessment beforehand, also mapping all the warrens in your target area, and then using it as follow-up to ripping. Important to confirm that wildlife are not using the warren system. Ensure that rabbits are in the warren as well before you apply the toxin. So you can use dogs to chase them down, or you can make some noise and that type of thing. And because you would have done, often you've done your ripping and removed the surface harbour, there's not a lot of places for them to hide above ground anyway. So that's really important to make sure they're actually in the warren when you do it, or they won't be impacted. Identify all the entrances with a smoking device. Make sure you cut them back and get a good seal. Also got to make sure that you're wearing all the appropriate PPE because it is dangerous stuff, and it is poisonous to humans as well. So got to make sure of that. When you're doing it, you got to eat all entrances, and the best way to do it as well is to start up the top of the hill if there is a hill and work your way down because the phosphine gas, as we mentioned, is heavier than air. It'll drop down towards the bottom. So yeah, sorry, work at the bottom and then make your way up, and also consider the wind and that type of thing. And monitoring is important, and repeating. And again, you must follow the label directions for this. So you do need an A cup for your pindone. For your fumigation. So just to reiterate the keys to success for rabbit management, I focused on the use of chemicals here, but it's really important to develop a strategic integrated management plan and using the science and the evidence that Heidi touched on. It's basically reduce the numbers baiting, and then you do your harbour destruction, then you follow up with fumigation. Really important. So yeah, as you can see there, ripping should be included if you possibly can. Implement them when they're most effective. Think about the biology and ecology of the animal. Always work with your neighbours, adhere to legislation and label directions, and monitor, refine, and adapt. That's basically it from me. Oh, there might be one more slide with some further information. Yeah, I should mention it. The AgVic website has some really good videos there on all the different types of techniques that you can use for rabbit management, including fumigation and baiting, but also some of the other ones. So if you'd like to know more details about that, just jump on there and have a look. It's and the other thing too, you can always give us a call. And PestSmart website's also great. There's plenty of great information on there.
Thanks, Jason. That was great. That was a great presentation. And unfortunately, I can't see the Q&A from my end today, but I didn't have a plan for a question time at the moment. I thought we could watch Jack speaking because it will actually showcase how to put some of those things that Jason talked into practice. And so if everyone is okay with that, we'll just keep going and then have a good break it until after Jack's and go and reassess all the questions and have a bit of time to answer. Just keeping in mind that Ina at the end is going to be talking a lot about biocontrols yeah, so we'll keep that in mind. We'll have some questions at the end as well. So Jack, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm
Your
ready, Anna.
presentation.
Just need my presentation on the screen. There we go. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Hailing from Bunurong country here. So I work as an invasive species officer for Bass Coast Landcare Network on a whole different range of ecosystems and different land tenures. So I've got a lot of experience working with government agencies as well as members of the community. So next slide, please, Anna. So there's a lot of themes that you'll observe coming through from Heidi's and Jason's presentations, and that's about this formula for control and the necessary steps and order to follow. So this is if you are embarking on rabbit control wherever you are, you follow this formula and you will have success. It's not always going to happen in the first time you do it, but you need to persist. So where we always start is with pre-control monitoring, and monitoring comes in many different forms. So for us, we might use active rabbit warrens as one of our metrics, but you could just use it. You could use rabbit droppings, rabbit diggings, spotlight data. So if you want to go spotlighting and count the number of rabbits you're seeing, that's also a very useful piece of data that you're going to use to guide your control. And the reason you want to do the pre-control monitoring is so that once you follow all the steps that follow it and come after, you can then do some more monitoring at the end and you have an accurate sort of depiction of where you're at. And then that's where you use that data to know if you need to do more control afterwards or not. So after the pre-control monitoring is when we will use an appropriate control technique, which a lot of the time is site specific. And on the screen, you can see a bunch of different control methods: baiting, fumigation, shooting. Exclusion fencing is another one. And you're not always going to be able to use every control method available to you. So that's where you make an assessment and choose the most appropriate one. Some of the case studies I'll show you after have integrated all three or all four where possible. Once you've done the initial population reduction is where you want to embark on warren ripping and collapsing, which is an essential step that can't be skipped if you want successful rabbit control long term, because the rabbits require the warren for successful reproduction. And depending on the age of these warrens, they'll have multiple different chambers where you've got many different generations of rabbits growing up that are ready to disperse and claim their own territory. Once you've finished the warren ripping and collapsing is where you'll follow up with shooting, maybe some more fumigation or baiting, as well as warren checks, because there's always going to be a few rabbits that, sort of manage to escape. So this is where you want to do your follow-up control, and then you follow that with the post-control monitoring. So, if you're happy with your work, then that's where you could take a little rest. But just know that with rabbits, the work doesn't stop. And that's something we've learned the hard way. So next slide, please, Anna. This is an example of a program we did at Reef Island, Coronella area, if anyone's familiar with it, in West Gippsland. And we started off as a contracting work for Parks Victoria, which is the red dots you can see on the screen is Parks Victoria land, and it's Western Port Intertidal Coastal Zone. So the red dots you can see are active rabbit warrens. So that's where we did our pre-control monitoring to assess the scope of the problem and what we were working with. And then we could always use that as a reference or a guide afterwards to come back and know if we were successful or not. You'll see the green polygon in the bottom left is a cultural exclusion zone. So Bunurong Land Council Aboriginal Corporation are our registered Aboriginal party, and that is a site of significance for them. So we had mapped this before that exclusion zone got recognised, and thus we weren't able to do any rabbit control in there. So that's for Bunurong Land Council to decide how they want to deal with that. And for the time being, I think they're just in a maintenance phase and not deciding not to do anything with it. So we did a few phases of control here, depending on where we started with the red dots, and that was fumigation because baiting was not a tool that was available to us. It's also a bit of a sand dune environment, so it's very sensitive, and excavation was not an option for us. So we opted for fumigation, and we followed that up with implosion from a contractor, Brad Spear. But what we realised is there's a huge population of rabbits in the Parks Victoria land, but the private property that adjoins it up the top, where you'll see all the yellow dots, was completely inundated with rabbits as well. And that's very important to note when you are conducting rabbit control. You want to do it at the biggest scale available to you, because we could do all the work and be a success, 100% successful in the Parks Victoria land. But while there's this huge population of rabbits in this private property directly next to it, all of our work would be for nothing. And this is where we engaged the different stakeholders involved. So that included the owner of the farm, where those yellow dots are, as well as you can see on the far right, there's a road or a track there. That's actually Bass Coast Shire land. So obviously they're a very important stakeholder in this as well, because they had their fair share of warrens along the road there. And that's where we use some of the connections we have with council and leveraged funding to get some co-contribution into this program. And we got access to the private property there, and the monitoring we did there was spotlighting. And over 2 spotlight nights, we averaged counting 300 rabbits each night, which is, far too many. We also mapped all the active rabbit warrens we could find, and most of them were sort of along those fence lines or in these shelter belts. And in a lot of those shelter belts, you can see down the bottom there, was overrun by boxthorn and blackberry, which is a common theme for rabbits using weeds as harbour and sort of creating the ecosystem that suits them best. Next slide, please, Anna. So I've touched on this before, but this was a really integrated approach to rabbit control where we employed all of the techniques that you can see on the screen there, and all of them have their different times and application. Next slide, please, Anna. So once we'd done all of our pre-control monitoring, we opted for baiting. Because we were dealing with such a large area of land, we were able to use the bait layer, which you can see in that photo on the left, and tow that behind the car. And we did six large bait trails at about 100 meters each. And the bait we used for this occasion was 1080. Given that we're all licensed with our A cups with the 1080 endorsement, we were able to purchase that and buy it at bulk. And it's a very useful toxin for dealing with rabbits at this scale because they only need to eat about 4 to 6 grains of oats for them to die. And then the necessary step, next morning after baiting, we were there to collect all the carcasses, given there is a high raptor population in the area. Next slide, please, Anna. We were able to employ or contract the services of a local civil company to do our rabbit warren excavations. And you can see on the photo on the left, they're using a single tine, which is an extremely effective tool for rabbit warren excavations because you can really get that crisscross method. The site that you can see that's actually being excavated is on that council road I mentioned earlier, and it's a biolink site, so it's meant to be revegetation. There was thousands of trees planted here years before, but as you can see, this area here is completely devoid of any vegetation, which is due to the extremely high rabbit population in the area. So following the baiting, we went straight into excavations, and we had 3 days excavating this property. Next slide, please, Anna. So this is an example of probably the biggest rabbit warren that was there, which is on the council land, but it's also shared along the fence line with the private landholder. So it really emphasises that need for collaboration between stakeholders. As you can see, the before and after. Before ripping, this ground was devoid of any life and the soil just collapsed after ripping. And the photo on the right is after it's been tracked out and recompacted with the excavator, which is an important step not to miss when you're excavating because you want to make it hard for the rabbits to get back in. Next slide, please, Anna. Oh, sorry, before I go into this, I'll just touch on, so the follow-up control we did back on the previous case study was shooting, and we were able to knock off 40 rabbits the next night with the licensed shooter. And it's in a maintenance phase now, but there's always going to be work there to be done because unfortunately the properties further east from that have large rabbit populations. So it emphasises that need for landscape level and community action. And the next case study I'm going to talk about is from Kilcunda, where we were contacted by a landholder here who had a few rabbit warrens on his property. But as you can see, there's about 6 or 7 quarter-acre blocks or half-acre blocks here with farm fences. So we told the landholder, look, there's not much point you doing anything unless you want to completely fence your property off, which is going to be expensive and time-consuming. So we asked him to speak to his neighbours and see if they were interested. And thankfully, majority of them came to the party. They were all sharing this problem and were all fed up. So we had John, who organised and coordinated all his neighbours, and then we came and did a question and answer session where we basically informed the residents of our plan if they were willing, and they were able to ask any questions they had of us. And as you can see, all the red dots on the map here indicate active rabbit warrens, and this is another example of where there's a bunch of different stakeholders and different land tenures. So the residential ones, the majority of the ones you can see in the middle of the screen there, but on the far right and the far left is more council land. So it was clear that the landholders had a desire to act and do something about rabbits, but they were hesitant to put up funding or out of their own pockets if the council weren't going to do anything because they were complicit in the problem as well. And was another case where we were able to leverage the council, which doesn't always happen, I want to add. So it takes work, and the council thankfully came to the party and provided a bit of funding for us to continue the control on their land and ensure that the landholders were going to get bang for buck with their work. So in total, 100 rabbit warrens mapped in this site, and every property here was different, and it comes back to that integrated approach where there's not one size fits all for every landholder. So in the different properties, we used a combination of shooting, fumigation, exclusion fencing, but the common denominator was excavation among all of them. So it's that theme that I keep touching on where you want to reduce the population, and how you do that is up to you, really, as long as you are doing that and following it by warren ripping. So, and then once we'd conducted all this work, we got to the point where it was 0 active warrens after, which is a huge result. And the landholders were, very happy with it. And as Heidi was talking about earlier, cheap to manage going forward. So you want to spend that initial investment, which might be a bit expensive, but if you do it right and do it correctly, then you should just be in a maintenance phase after, and it will be pretty affordable. Next slide, please, Anna. Here's an example of some of the things that we were dealing with out there. So this was an old boat that had been sitting there for God knows how long, that had a rabbit warren underneath it. And these are the kind of random areas that you need to look for when you are, doing rabbit warren mapping, because this boat used to have a wooden top on top of it, and that's a common case. It's just harbour for rabbits. It's giving them protection from the air, whilst also having a void underneath where they're uninhabited and uninhibited to take cover and also establish a warren that they can reproduce in. The photo on the right is an example of exclusion fencing. This deck was overrun by rabbits. We were able to exclude the rabbits from there, and that remains to this day. Next slide, please, Anna. Another example of exclusion fencing. The photo on the right is a dam at one of the properties that had about 15 rabbit warrens in it, all of varying sizes, and that was a huge source of rabbits, and the landholder wasn't really too aware of it. So this is where that education piece and upskilling of landholders is really valuable. Next slide, please, Anna. So this is the council rail trail. This is one of the rabbit warrens we're dealing with on the left, one of many. And then once again, the photo on the right, after excavations, you can see all the tracking out of the excavator and completely leveled. So the landholders were really grateful after this. Next slide, please. You can see the excavator in action here. It was a pretty difficult site for some of them, but this was one of the landholders on the left adjacent. So this landholder actually had plans to completely redo his fence, but obviously he was hesitant to do so with all these council rabbits on the side, and it comes back to that point about collaboration, because that is the only really way to achieve all this. So as you can see, that's another example of the excavation, and the property behind the excavator you can see there actually had quite a few rabbit warrens that we mapped, and they didn't want to get involved, which is a real shame. And we spoke to the community and said, this is what's going to happen. You need to deal with all of the rabbit warrens available to you, or you are going to have reinvasion. It's not a matter of if, it is going to happen. Unfortunately, there has been some level of rabbit reinvasion due to the 2 landholders out of about 10 not partaking, and that's really disappointing to us. And that is a reality that I think is worth sharing, because you can do all the work you want, but you really do need everyone to be pulling in the same direction. So I would love to be able to say that there's zero rabbit warrens after this, but due to two people not partaking, there's been some level of reinvasion. But that's not to say that the work was for nothing, because we did give the people, the landholders that did partake, the skills to be able to maintain their own property and identify the threats of rabbits where they do pop up. Next slide, please, Anna. So these are the themes and key learnings that I keep touching on before, and that's collaboration between all the different stakeholders, because everyone has different neighbours and different sources of rabbits. So it's important to speak to your neighbours, speak to your councillors, speak to government agencies, and reach out to people with the skills. If you are someone that doesn't really know where to start, there's always someone to call. The comprehensive site assessment, that comes back to my monitoring, so pre and post control. But the pre-control is really important. You need to know the problem that you're up against, and then use that as your guide moving forward. The integrated approach, there's a bunch of different control techniques available to you. Use the one that is most suitable to you, and don't be afraid to employ other ones if you can. Education and sharing of knowledge between members of the community is fantastic, and that's something that we've noticed a lot through this Partnerships Against Pest program. Is the more people who know how to deal with rabbits and share that knowledge with other people, the better off we are. 85 to 95% population reduction of rabbits is essential to keep them below the threshold level that allows them to recover. So if you've killed half the rabbits that you might be dealing with, that's not enough. They're extremely highly fecund species with a high reproductive rate, and they will bounce back, as we've seen from Heidi's graphs earlier about how they disperse and the numbers they get to. And the really important one is persistence, because they're highly adaptable species and resilient, and they will bounce back if given the chance. But don't be defeated, and keep going on. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, that was an amazing share that I think, there's a lot of learnings, successes, and some positivity, although I do appreciate that it can be a challenge to work, especially, I mean, we had a lot of questions about how to work with neighbors, how to get other people engaged. I mean, it is, as Jack said, it's quite difficult, especially when you're working with a big number of people and someone doesn't want to participate. But I guess it comes down to awareness and education, continuous education of the community around the issue of rabbits, and also learning how to do things the right way, which that's what we're trying to share here today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can actually have a look at the chat. And then we'll have an opportunity now for questions, and we'll finalize our session today with Ina. I haven't had the chance to have a look at the Q&A. So Sarah, if you think there's anything there, or if anyone else can see something that is worth sharing live, please do so while I catch up.
Yep, there's quite a few. So I think Teresa asks, are both pindone and 1080 a risk for secondary poisoning? Does anyone want
There's
to
always
answer?
an inherent risk of secondary poisoning with baiting, but as Jason said before, there is an antidote available with pindone. But whatever species might be eating a rabbit that has consumed the bait needs to eat extremely high amounts of that. But it's also important to remember that if you are undertaking baiting, that you need to be actively surveying the area after baiting and picking up any carcasses and disposing of them correctly.
Yeah, Jack's exactly right there. So and it varies as well depending on the toxin and depending on the species. So it's a pretty difficult question, but I think that it's really important to do your follow up post baiting to reduce the chances of secondary poisoning. But yeah, there are LD50s and those types of things available. I don't have them on hand, but you can work out what non-targets are potentially in your area, and then look at their sensitivity, and then for both toxins, and then try and choose one accordingly. Try to choose one that would provide less of a risk, and then of course do all your follow up afterwards.
Thank you. David has a couple of questions. He questions the order of ripping, then fumigating, the humaneness of crushing the rabbits in the burrows, then following up with fumigating has been asked. Any tips to explain why this procedure is best?
In theory, David, hopefully the population reduction you've done prior to ripping has knocked off most of the rabbits present in the area. So in theory, hopefully the warrens don't have any rabbits in them when you are ripping. But if there were rabbits in there while ripping, yeah, it's pretty quick death.
Is it true the fumigate is best when soil moisture is high to activate the chemical?
Yep, I can answer that one. So yeah, the little pellets, I guess, they are reactive to moisture, so that it is better if the soil is slightly moist. So yeah, the best time to do that is sort of, I guess, you like we've said earlier, do the baiting first, then do the ripping, and by the time all that's done, you're sort of getting into that time where the soil is starting to get a bit of moisture in it during that later in autumn phase. But you can also add moisture into the warren as well with a tube and that type of thing. So like I said earlier, there's some videos on our website that describe how to do that most effectively.
Anna, how are we going for time?
We're going well. So we still
Cool.
have a little bit more time for questions, and we do have a lot. So I think we can
Yeah,
keep
there's lots there.
responding some.
Yeah, this question is about rabbits, controlling rabbits in town, on public land or DECA council land. Is it right that 1080 can't be used on public land or within a radius of human population? If that's correct, how do we do an integrated approach?
So yeah, I guess the burden will fall, or the decision would fall on the land manager itself, and a lot of that, it depends how sort of risk averse the agency is. Some agencies are quite hesitant to use that, or if they are going down the baiting path, they'll either completely exclude people from the area or use exclusion cages. The second part of the question was about proximity to a township. I don't know the exact number. Do you know the exact number, Jason?
On the distances, no, not for 1080, not off the top of my head, I'm sorry, but
There
generally
are
in those,
limitations on it, but it is on the safe directions for use. All of that is there.
and generally too, those more peri-urban type areas, pindone is generally the preferred poison because of the antidote and because of the label. On the label as well, they have restrictions and those types of things, and it definitely does matter on the land size. I think it's 1,000 square meters at a minimum for use of pindone. So it's important to look at the label and the directions for use in those situations. But there are other potential options, and urban rabbits are tricky, no doubt about it, because of it does limit what you can and can't do. But Ina is going to talk about the use of biocontrol later on, and that might be a substitute potentially in those areas. It's probably not likely to be as effective for that population knockdown, but it still does assist with reducing rabbit numbers prior to doing, harbour destruction or whatever else.
Cool. And we've just got a couple of questions that we can knock off in one go about ripping.
That would be the last two, Sarah, that we
Yeah,
got.
sure.
Yeah.
So people just want to know in places where there's sensitive vegetation or there's buildings or hard things that they can't get machinery up to, is there an alternative? And how do you know how deep to rip in other places?
There's always an alternative. I saw one question in the chat talking about vegetation. Well, there's sensitive vegetation, um, and then also scrub. So in the case of the scrub, you'd probably try and, I don't know, if possible, try and remove, a foot, 2 feet from the bottom of it, so that you have clear line of sight to the bottom. Um, because that's what a lot of rabbits thrive off. Under buildings, we deal with a lot. So that's where you'll probably be going down the exclusion path, if possible, or maybe extra concrete. It's all site specific, and the sensitive vegetation is a tough one as well, because obviously there's limits on what you can do with that. But it's yeah, it's hard to say without me seeing the site, because every site is specific in its own way.
Yeah, and sometimes there are going to be situations where you're not going to be able to rip because of sensitive vegetation or cultural heritage sites, those types of things. So, like Jack said, you've just got to be a bit flexible sometimes, and it might not be perfect. The further you deviate away from some of those techniques and use alternatives, that the less effective your program might be. So you might just be working for longer periods of time. The other one, I think Jack touched on it as well, is implosion can also be used in some situations as an alternative to ripping that can is often seen as a less of an impact as well. So that's a potential option. And when you can't rip at all, it might just mean that you just have to do more fumigation and more follow-up fumigation. It might take 5 or 6 times to shut down that warren system with fumigation instead.
The last bit I'll just touch on quickly. The depth of the excavation is just dependent on the site. So in sandy soils, you'll find the rabbits go a lot deeper. And you'll see once you rip with that tine, you'll be able to get a cross section of the warren, and that's where you'll want to follow that cross section if you're identifying holes or burrows further down. But yeah, generally, if you find a harder substrate like clay or coffee rock, you can be pretty confident that the rabbits aren't going deeper than that.
And just quickly, there is a minimum as well. So under the Catchment and Land Protection Act, it's a requirement to be at least 50 centimetres, but deeper than that is often better, because the warren system will usually go down a bit further than that. So if you're just scraping across the top, you're leaving animals down the bottom underneath, and parts of the warren still unaffected by the ripping program.
Well, I think we need now to move on to Ina. Thanks so much for valuable answers, Jason and Jack. Also acknowledging there's a few questions here that I believe that might be answered with Ina's presentation. So just be a bit patient. And if you're ready, we're good to go. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, good to go. Thanks, Anna, for the invite. I'm hoping tonight I can calibrate some expectations with regards to biocontrols, and also at the end of towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to briefly touch on some of our research. Next slide, please. So first of all, we'll start out with some definitions. So biocontrol is a self-spreading pathogen where the point of release is followed by a continental widespread and establishment of the virus. So a good example of that is RHDV2. On the other hand, a biocide is a virus that acts locally. It has no or very limited spread. It doesn't establish and or cause repeated outbreaks. An example of that is RHDV1 K5. Next slide, please. So Australia has a long history of biocontrols, and it started with a myxoma virus, which causes myxomatosis in the 1950s. And then to help with the transmission, they introduced rabbit fleas in the 1970s, and then Spanish fleas, which were just before the introduction of RHDV1. With the introduction of K5, which was the national rollout in 2007, which acts mostly as biocide. Just before then, RHDV2 emerged, and it's estimated that the reduction in rabbit numbers was about 60%. As Heidi touched on in her presentation, the damage of rabbits that rabbits cause is about $200 million a year. Next slide, please. So let's have a look at susceptibility. So RHDV1, of which K5 is a strain, infects young rabbits, but it does not kill them. So this is very important, okay? And I'll repeat that later on, in that if you release K5 at the wrong time, you will infect them, they won't die, and you're immunizing them. They're producing antibodies, and that's going to give you problems later on. With K5 in adult rabbits, it can kill, and in hares, it does not kill. RHDV2, on the other hand, kills young rabbits, adult rabbits, and hares, and the time that it kills is about 48 to 72 hours after infection. The big advantage of using biocontrols is that, like RHDV2, is that they are species specific. So that if other animals feed on a dead carcass, they don't die. Next slide, please. So to understand these viruses, both are transmitted by mosquitoes. So myxoma is transmitted by fleas, mosquitoes, and they're transmitted from live rabbit to live rabbit. RHDV, on the other hand, is transmitted by the fecal oral route and transmitted by insects, mainly flies, and they're transmitted from dead rabbits. So the more dead rabbits you have that's infected, you'll get that transmission cycle. Next slide, please. Okay, so to give you an understanding of biocontrols, this is an example from that the weed groups use, where initially you have a population, and it varies depending on climate and weather, and drought. So you get this periods of high amounts of weeds and then low amounts of weeds, and there's an equilibrium around that. When a biocontrol agent is released, the population will increase of the agent, and then you'll eventually get this equilibrium that forms after the biocontrol is released. Next slide. So we can use this in a similar way to look at rabbit biocontrols. So initially you had this undulating effect from with no biocontrol, and then you have a decrease. Now, with rabbits, an added complication is population immunity, and which you can get, which will lead to a residual population having antibodies that will cause you headaches in trying to manage it. Brian Cook, who's an expert in the kind of field, has said that myxoma generally kills about 50% of rabbits, and RHDV kills about 70 to 80%. So if both are circulating, you can get about 90% reduction in rabbits. So next slide, please. So if we have a very simplified look at a calculation. So for infection, we talk about an infection rate, and that's the percentage of animals that get infected. And the case fatality rate is the percentage of infected animals that will die. So if you have a population of what we call naive rabbits of 100, that's the ones without any antibodies, at 95% infection rate, you'll get 5 rabbits that will not get infected. And if you have an 80% case fatality rate, that means out of the 95 rabbits that that are infected, 76 will die. So that leaves us with 19 rabbits, and they've got antibodies, and that's what we refer to scientifically as being seropositive. So all up, we have 24 rabbits that would survive, and 80% of them would be seropositive. And they're your next year's immune breeding population. Next slide, please. So if we have a look at K5, if K5 is ideally released at the end of a season where there is no young rabbits around, if we have a 90% infection rate, 80% case fatality rate in susceptible animals. So if RHDV2, for instance, has gone through and 50% of those rabbits have got antibodies to it, they will survive the infection. So it's a bit complicated with antibodies in that if you've had a recent infection that's come through a population, the antibody levels are high. They will eventually wane, which makes more rabbits susceptible. But in this example, you'll have 5 rabbits that will survive, having no antibodies, but the ones that were immune, they will survive. 50 of those will survive. 5 will have just RHDV2 antibodies, but 45 will have both K5 and RHDV2 antibodies. Out of the naive rabbits, 9 rabbits will survive at that case fatality. And that gives you 64 rabbits as a residual population, of which 92 have antibodies. And that will give you problems. Next slide. So a reminder with susceptibility, if K5 is released at the wrong time when there are a lot of young around, like in breeding season, K5 won't kill those rabbits and you'll get immunized young rabbits. And that will give you problems in trying to control them because the rabbits are partially immune. Next slide, please. So how to use K5. On the product label, you've got to adhere to what's been approved by the APVMA. So on the label, it says you can trap and inject and release the rabbits. So if you're doing anything else, so what we've heard is some people trap them, inject them and keep them in the cage. That's going against the license. And that is an animal ethics nightmare because what you're doing is a scientific experiment. So please don't do that because that requires animal ethics. What's recommended is baiting because you have a better chance of getting the virus into susceptible rabbits, and the carcasses from the K5 that die act as a source of secondary infection. Next slide, please. So considerations for rabbit bite control. First of all, rabbit bite control is not a silver bullet. It needs to be released at the right time. And for K5, it's when there are no young around. So timing is important. RHDV is transmitted by that fecal oral route, but also by insects. So again, timing is important. If there's lots of insects around, you'll have more transmission. Rabbit bite control is effective when the rabbit numbers are low. And if RHDV2 has been through or is still active in your area, K5 probably won't make much of a difference. Just let RHDV2 rip. It's important that biocontrol is part of an integrated pest management system like Jack and Jason have outlined. And therefore, conventional control is still needed to remove adult rabbits before the next breeding season. And sometimes biocontrol shouldn't be released. Next slide. So I'm going to go into a bit of research. So basically, we offer a testing service for RHDV and myxoma virus. So if you've got a rabbit that has died and you want to know what it's died from, contact us. We'll send you out a sample kit. If you want testing for RHDV, you require a liver sample. If it's for myxoma virus, it requires an eyelid sample. So you can either request via the Rabbit Scan app or by a direct submission. There's our website. But if you just Google CSIRO and calicivirus, you'll find us. And we've had over 3,000 samples received, and we've identified 6 different RHDV variants since 2015. The predominant one in Australia is RHDV2. So if you have a look at our website, we report on a monthly basis the numbers of myxoma or RHDV that we detect, and we have positives throughout the year. There's more cases in warmer months, as you would expect when there's more insects around. Next slide, please. One of the other activities that we've done is, and this is through funding from MLA, is we have tested the rabbits that have come in and have been found to be not RHDV or myxoma positive. So a third of the rabbits have tested negative that were submitted. And so the question was, what is killing these rabbits, and can we exploit this for rabbit control purposes? So we did what was called next generation sequencing, or NGS sequencing, of unexplained rabbit deaths. We sequenced 48 domestic rabbit livers, and we sequenced the total RNA. So that was to detect RNA viruses, replicating DNA viruses, and any other pathogen, because that's its replicating form. Next slide, please. And what did we find? So we did some onshore, it's called bioprospecting, and we got a better understanding of what the pathogen profile in rabbits are. We identified a hepatitis E virus. Now, this virus can also be what's called zoonotic, which means it can be transmitted to humans, which doesn't make it a very good candidate. Offshore, we had collaborations with Chile and the US. So in Chile, we identified a new benign rabbit calicivirus. And in the US, we identified a new Hepasi virus. And Hepasi viruses are similar to hepatitis C. It's of that same family in humans. And that was identified in the silver lager species, the cottontail species. So from this work, no immediate candidate pathogens were identified to be used as future biocontrol agents, and we're continuing to monitor rabbit deaths around the world as a possible candidate for new biocontrols. Next slide. The other thing we've been doing is developing a organoid culture system for cultivation of virus. So up until we established this, the only way you could grow rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus was in the rabbit, by passaging it in the rabbit. So we've taken the liver, we basically grow them in 3D in a dome, and for the first time we've been able to grow the virus in the lab, in cell culture. And this had been tried for about 30 years. So we've been able to do that. And next slide, please. And what this means is our aim of our research is to develop a new biocontrol in a project we call RHDV Accelerator. So we're growing the virus in the presence of antibodies to make immune escape mutants. So basically creating viruses that can overcome immunity from existing strains. And this type of thing can be repeated over and over again. It's not genetically modified, but it will require registration. And Heidi mentioned in her talk that we estimate it'll take about 10 years with all the registration once we develop something. Okay, and the final thing is a thank you. These are our team members, and the funding for this research has come from MLA and also from DAF. So thank you.
Oh, well, that was amazing. Thanks, Ina, so much for your insight into the science behind rabbit control. do acknowledge there's been a lot of information shared tonight, a lot of techniques, a lot of different control methods. It's a lot to take home. So this webinar will be available as a recording in the near future. I also will pick up all the questions and answers from today, and we'll probably develop a Q&A, like a fact sheet, and include some of your questions in there. So none of this, your input's definitely not going to be lost. It has been, this webinar had a huge amount of interest from the community. So it just shows that the problem is huge around Victoria and probably elsewhere in Australia as well. So when people ask when's more funding coming available, just wanted to say that we all have a voice, not just the peak bodies and diggers, and we all have a voice. Your groups have a voice. You can contact your local MP and just express that there is a need for more investment into the control of pests and weeds, in particular rabbits. So just use your voice. We do have some resources on our website on how to do that. So please feel free to go and have a look. We do have, we only have 4 minutes left. So I'm just having a look through the questions. Also want to thank all our speakers for being spectacular, answering your questions in the Q&A function there. And I'll just have a quick look through anything that might be worth answering live. So Jason, do you know the difference between first and second generation poisons and the risk of secondary poisoning occurring if predators eat a rabbit that has ingested pindone?
Yes, so there is first and second gen. So as I mentioned earlier, pindone is a first generation anticoagulant, and the second generation anticoagulants are things like brodifacoum and other things that tend to be more of a one-shot dose. So I mentioned that pindone needs repeat dosing. Often the second gen is less doses required, but a lot of the second gen second gen anticoagulants, are a bit more residual in a carcass and that type of thing, and they also tend to be the things that you find in rat and mouse baits as well. So potential issues there for secondary poisoning. So not just specifically down to pindone, it's and rabbit management. A lot of the time, these secondary poisoning risks are more associated with the off-the-shelf type rodenticides that are available.
Yeah. And I guess as you, Jason, and Jack said, it's about probably using the right quantity. So knowing your numbers, knowing the activity, using it at the right time of the day that has been mentioned, and also picking up carcasses as soon as you can. I guess that was my takeaways on how to probably reduce off-target impacts. An interesting one here from Tom Smith on asking if the 1080 is soluble in water. Can you just use it as a bait station using water? So they drink the water with the 1080 in it. Is that something, Jason, you know anything about?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So it's water soluble, impacted by water, so it degrades quickly. So no, if you put bait out and it's going to rain, that type of thing, that could impact the bait. So higher moisture means more rapid degradation. So yeah, be not the way to go, I would have thought, and probably you'd have non-target issues with water as well. Everything drinks water.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I think this is all the questions we have time for. There's a lot of them been answered, and I'll definitely pick up that input from all of you. And I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight and all your great questions and comments. Also a special thank you to all our presenters tonight, Heidi, Jason, Jack, and Ina, and also to my colleague Sarah for really helping running this session today. We're already working on further pests and weeds webinars and other helpful resources, so please keep an eye on our website and our communication channels for more information as it becomes available. We have some great sessions that have also been recorded, past sessions. Please go and check our website if you're interested. We've got a foxes webinar. We also did a risk management on pests and weeds. Also, there's a short survey at the end of this webinar that I would love you to fill in. It is a quick survey. It should take less than 5 minutes, and it's really valuable to us so we can continue to improve. And from the team of Landcare Victoria and on behalf of our speakers tonight, I'd like to wish you all a good night, and I hope to see you again at a future webinar. Good night, everyone.